think about your life. What would you answer if someone asked, "Who are you?" You would probably start by saying your name and age, where are you from, what you do, work, study, your hobbies, and so on. What if they ask, what do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? You would probably say, I want to be traveling, I want to be married, maybe with children, or I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an artist, things like that, right? Most of us can give quick answers to these questions, not only because we know who we are and that we have the freedom to choose our own paths, but also because we know we have people around that support us and that can acknowledge what we're saying. We even have governments and institutions that give us documents validating the information that we give. If we ponder a little bit more about our answers, we realize that we are sharing the characteristics that define us, our character and sense of self. In other words, we are talking about our identity. Furthermore, we realize that what we call identity is not something entirely fixed. It is more dynamic, in constant construction and reconstruction. Because while there are characteristics that cannot change, like our height or the color of our skin, there are others that can or will change over time, depending on how we develop our sense of self, the context that we live in, and the experiences we've had, like our marital status or our professions. But we have to understand that even though identities are formed through a person's own character and sense of self, social perceptions are very important too, because we tend to recognize what or who we are based on validations that we get from the outside world. For example, what we call institutional identity is a characteristic that is granted to us by formal authorities, like our citizenship or our migratory status. So while citizenship is usually given by a government based on the person's place of birth or the parent's nationality, the migratory status is given based on the reasons for migration. A refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, or violence. Most likely, they cannot return home or are afraid to do so. The refugee status is granted by governments or the United Nations High Commission for the Refugees, UNHCR. Today, there are more than 25.4 million people registered as refugees worldwide. 53% of them are school-aged children under 18. And we are not even counting the other forcibly displaced populations, like the 43 million of internally displaced asylum seekers or stateless people. This means that there are more than 68 million forcibly displaced people worldwide that we know of.
Imagine waking up one day and you're forced to flee your home. You have to leave everything that you own and everything that you know behind. And then you find yourself in this new place. It's a foreign land. You are waiting to see if there's anywhere that will let you resettle permanently. So you don't know how long you're going to be here. You're probably with few family members or maybe none at all. And you're constantly afraid because you don't speak the language. Locals usually don't know what your rights and your freedoms are. And they don't know They don't know what your rights and your freedoms are. And you don't usually have the documents that you normally show to say who you are and why you're there. Now try to answer the question again. Who are you? Where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? It's not so simple to answer now, is it? Because think about it. You're in this new place, and nobody knows you, and the government gives you the refugee status. And this becomes who you are. It defines the way that people look at you and the way they treat you. And it basically becomes your whole identity to the outside world. But the problem with this is that because of lack of knowledge, intolerance, misleading or flat-out wrong information that's often given by the media, hateful discourse from politicians, and things spread around social networks as well, people tend to have a very bad misconception of what a refugee person is. For example, we often hear people think that all refugees are just illegal, undocumented immigrants, that they're all delinquents, that they're all terrorists. And they often tend to think that they're also always poor and uneducated and a general burden to their country that couldn't possibly sustain them all. And these fixed ideas create fear. And fear makes people reject and discriminate refugees. But these behaviors and these stereotypes, they have to change because, first of all, refugee status is a legal status that corroborates that these people are in need of international protection. Nobody wants to leave their home to become a refugee. It is their only option to survive and to find a life away from violence. And second of all, because refugees can be productive members of society when they are supported in the right way. Studies exist that show that they bring cultural and economic value to the receiving country, and that's regardless of whether it is a developing country or a developed country. And because refugees come from all kinds of different backgrounds. In our experience, we've met refugees that are also doctors and lawyers, bioengineers. We've even met a rocket scientist. So when you discriminate and reject refugees, you're not only denying them of their human rights, but you're also denying your host country from the benefits of their inclusion in society.
So, what do we do? The answer is simple. We do something. Start by learning about refugees, about their situations, and also about the plethora of projects and alternative solutions that are already out there and that you feel you can be part of. Become part of what we call a virtuous circle of influence, VCI. In our case, a VCI is an alliance of agents, public and private, that interact with and benefit from each other in order to, 1, help improve the life of refugees, 2, change the negative perceptions towards them, and 3, help refugees change the way they value themselves, regardless their situation of vulnerability. It's also a chain of action that reinforces itself through a feedback loop. This is what we strive to do at MSRI, the NGO where we work. When we started there, one of our main objectives was to deliver vocational workshops and health awareness talks to as many refugees as possible. So we began with the idea, the conviction, and the organization support, but with no money because the organization has very limited resources and not many acquaintances to rely on, really. So we began working with the staff members and the refugee community leaders to identify interests and needs. Then we connected with relevant people and organizations who helped us build and deliver the workshops. Sometimes we even covered some basic expenses ourselves. With the results of the first experiences, we were able to connect with this philanthropic organization in Kuala Lumpur who agreed to support us financially in order to keep the initiative going. We also strengthened the project by gathering feedback information from the refugees and the other agents that were involved in the process, which allowed us to learn and improve every time. This was a key factor that made the project be part of a long-term program in the organization. If you look at it, the agents that were involved in the VCI we formed were MSRI, the refugees, the local and international volunteers, plus the organizations with the means and the specialized knowledge needed, and us within MSRI as a connecting piece linking all the agents together. Good intentions aside, the agents also benefited from this experience. A VCI is not very easy to accomplish, as it requires the cooperation of all the agents involved. So the challenge is to find the people and the organizations that are flexible enough to add efforts that might be slightly different from their main scope of action in order to get a more comprehensive and probably a more sustainable solution to the populations and the different causes they are trying to help individually.
We must be open to linking the dots and joining efforts because amazing things happen when everyone comes together. We have witnessed firsthand the benefits of the potential that comes to fruition when a successful VCI is formed. One story that we want to share with you guys is of Kasim. He is a refugee that has been in Malaysia for 5 years with his wife and daughter. And when they first arrived here, they were at a very low point. They had lost everything, they didn't have any money, they didn't know anybody, and both Kasim and his wife were suffering from depression and trauma. But soon, with the help of MSRI and the social workers and our livelihood programs, they found a solution for him. He used his talent in sewing and designing to make a variety of different pouches and bags and backpacks, and they began to raise money and fund his startup. And with a few initial designs, he participated in local bazaars that are around the city. And his products were very successful. And he was selling a lot of things, and Kasim began to learn about the market. He learned about what it is to have a small business. He learned about his customers, and he even began to expand and diversify his product line. His talents were being recognized by the local community, and it got to the point where support was coming in stronger every time, and even large companies like AirAsia began to support him. They have actually recently engaged him in a project for the AirAsia Foundation. So through his work and all of the support that he was receiving all around, Kasim was able to regain his confidence and his strength, and it came full circle when he decided that he wanted to give back. And now he spends some time teaching other refugees his skills so that they may also find different livelihood options the way he did. And it's experiences like this and positive interactions like this. We are so proud of Kasim because of how far he's come. He is not only an accomplished artisan that can provide for his family, but he's also a mentor to the refugees. And this is what makes other people begin to see the different facets of a refugee's identity, which also helps the refugee begin to value again the characteristics that define them beyond their migratory status. Stories like Kasim's are just one of many that show us who refugees really are. Refugees are survivors. They're people who are strong and they're brave and they're resourceful, resilient, they're capable, they're valuable. And most importantly, again, they can be productive members of society when we support them in the right way. As for the people that were open enough to build relationships and engage with Kasim and other refugees, they came to see that they have a lot more in common with them than they ever thought. They can relate to them in some ways, they can learn from them, and they're not to be feared. The best part is that they also came to understand why it's so important and it's much more beneficial to help refugees and other vulnerable populations to thrive rather than to push them down and to marginalize them.
So this is why we invite you to become part of these efforts, of these movements. Everywhere you go, become not only agents of change, but also agents of connection and progress.
We have a very real global refugee crisis, and we must help people in need. Not only because it is the best and most beneficial thing for everyone, but because we don't know what tomorrow will bring, and what we do for others today might be what others do for us tomorrow.
Thank you.